It all started with a few plastic tombstones and a fog machine. Nothing fancy, just my usual Halloween setup. Every year, I decorated my front yard for the season. Some fake cobwebs, glowing pumpkins, a skeleton or two, maybe a spooky soundtrack playing faintly in the background. It was all in good fun, something the neighborhood kids looked forward to every October. But this year, it turned into something much bigger and a lot uglier than I ever expected. The trouble began when the new neighbor moved in across the street. Her name was Susan, though everyone soon started calling her Karen behind her back. She had that particular kind of energy, the type that looked for problems where there weren't any. Within a week of moving in, she had already emailed the HOA about lawn maintenance violations, complained about someone's recycling bins being left out too long, and sent a mass message in the community Facebook group about upholding standards. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was just overly enthusiastic about the neighborhood. But as October crept closer and I started setting up my decorations, I realized enthusiasm had nothing to do with IT. IT started small. The first week of October, I placed a few decorations, some pumpkins, a few foam gravestones, and a skeleton hanging from my tree. That same evening, I noticed her standing across the street, arms crossed, watching me. The next day, a letter appeared in my mailbox. It wasn't from the HOA, not officially. It was handwritten, but she'd signed it, Neighborhood Concerned Citizen. It said my decorations were inappropriate and offensive, and that some people might find the display disturbing. I laughed it off. It was Halloween after all. That's kind of the point. It's supposed to be spooky. But something about her tone rubbed me the wrong way. I ignored it, added some cobwebs to the bushes, and called it a day. 2 days later, my decorations were gone. Every single one. The tombstones had vanished, the skeleton was missing, and even the pumpkins had disappeared from the porch. I found one of them smashed near the curb that I knew exactly who had done it, but without proof, I couldn't confront her. Instead, I decided to rebuild, but this time, bigger. The next weekend, I went all in. I ordered animatronics, fog machines, motion sensor lights, and a life-size Grim Reaper that could move its head and speak in a deep, echoing voice. I wasn't trying to provoke her, not yet, but I wasn't about to let someone else dictate how I celebrated Halloween. When everything was set up again, it looked incredible. The neighborhood kids loved it. Parents stopped by to take photos. I even set up a small donation box for a local animal shelter, figuring I could turn the decorations into something positive. It should have been the end of it. But with someone like Karen, it never was. The next morning, I woke up to red and blue flashing lights outside my window. 2 police cars. At first, I thought something serious had happened, maybe an accident or a break-in. But as soon as I stepped outside, one of the officers walked straight toward me. They told me there had been a complaint about disturbing and offensive imagery on my property. Apparently, someone had reported that my display was traumatizing neighborhood children and creating a public nuisance. I didn't even have to ask who filed the complaint. She was standing on her porch across the street, arms crossed, wearing a smug smile that made my blood boil. The officers were professional about it. They looked around, saw the decorations, and quickly realized there was nothing illegal or harmful. They told me to maybe keep the sound effects turned down at night, but otherwise, I was fine. One of them even said his kids would love to see something like this in their neighborhood. That should have been a victory, but it didn't feel like one. I could see her watching as the police left, her face tight with frustration. I knew that for her, this wasn't over. Over the next few days, she escalated. She sent emails to the HOA board demanding they take immediate action against me. She posted in the neighborhood group about disturbing displays that endanger children's emotional well-being. She even claimed that I was attracting unsavory visitors to the area, meaning, of course, anyone who came by to take a photo. The HOA sent me a notice saying they'd received complaints but couldn't take action unless I was violating a specific rule. I wasn't. I had checked every guideline before putting the decorations up. I knew exactly where the lines were, and I was careful to stay inside them. That made her even angrier. She started leaving nasty notes on my mailbox. One morning, I found a printed flyer taped to my door, warning neighbors to avoid the haunted house on Maple Lane. It accused me of mocking death and creating a hostile environment. It was so ridiculous that some neighbors started joking about it. A few even told me privately that they were on my side, that they were sick of her controlling attitude. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done yet. People like her never are. A few nights later, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of movement outside. I looked through the window and caught a glimpse of her. Yes, her. In my yard, trying to unplug my fog machine. I grabbed my phone and started recording, making sure to capture her face as she realized she'd been caught. She froze, then bolted back across the street like a guilty raccoon. I didn't post the video right away. I wanted to see how she'd react first. The next morning, she pretended nothing happened, smiled and waved as she watered her flowers. But when I uploaded that clip to the community Facebook page with the caption, "Caught the Halloween Grinch in the act," things blew up. The comments came flooding in. Some neighbors were shocked, others were furious, and a few thought it was hilarious. Karen, of course, tried to deny it, claiming the video was edited and that she'd only been checking on a possible fire hazard. No one bought it, but instead of backing off, she doubled down. That night, another HOA notice appeared, this one saying they'd be holding a special meeting to discuss the appropriateness of seasonal displays. It was clearly directed at me, though they didn't name names at that point. I knew exactly what I needed to do. If she wanted a show, I'd give her one. A Halloween spectacle no one in the neighborhood would ever forget. But first, I needed to make sure everything was perfectly legal, perfectly within the rules, and perfectly infuriating to her. Because nothing made someone like Karen more miserable than realizing they had no power to stop you. And so, the plan began to form. A plan that would turn my front yard into the spookiest, loudest, most unforgettable act of neighborhood revenge anyone had ever seen. After the chaos of the police visit and the viral neighborhood post, I realized something important. Karen thrived on control. She wanted everyone to follow her standards, to live by her rules. The HOA meetings, the letters, the complaints, it wasn't about my decorations. It was about power. She wanted to prove that she could bend people to her will. So, my plan wasn't just about decorations anymore. It was about taking that power away from her in the most spectacular and legal way possible. I started by revisiting the HOA guidelines. I read them line by line, highlighting every clause about decorations, noise limits, and seasonal appropriateness. Most of it was vague, terms like excessive displays and disturbing imagery, without any specific definitions. That vagueness had always worked in Karen's favor because it let her twist the rules however she wanted. But it could also work in mine. There were no restrictions on the number of decorations, only that they must not obstruct public pathways. There were no rules about lighting, as long as it didn't pose a safety hazard. And as for noise, as long as I didn't exceed city ordinance levels after 10 p.m., I was in the clear. That meant I could go big. Really big. The next morning, I made a few calls. Within a week, several packages arrived. Fog machines, lighting rigs, speakers, animatronic monsters, projectors, and even a mechanical witch that could fly across the yard on a cable. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning, but rumors started spreading fast. Neighbors slowed down as they drove by, trying to peek at what I was building. Kids on bikes stopped at the edge of my driveway to whisper about the crazy Halloween guy. Meanwhile, Karen stood across the street every day, watching, fuming, pretending to prune her roses, but really just keeping tabs on me. I took my time setting everything up. It wasn't just a display anymore. It was an experience. I built small wooden fences to control the flow of visitors. I added glowing lanterns that led to a haunted path through the yard. I even installed a motion-triggered sound system that played different effects depending on where you walked. Footsteps, chains, whispers, distant screams. It was all carefully measured and tested, every piece calibrated to meet HOA and city guidelines. I wasn't giving her an inch to attack me with. By the time the special HOA meeting came around, my setup was about 80% complete. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a beige, overly air-conditioned room that smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. I showed up early, mostly out of curiosity. Karen was there, of course, sitting in the front row with a stack of printed photos, my decorations, taken from across the street. The board members looked tired before the meeting even started. When it was her turn to speak, she launched into her usual tirade. She called my display a grotesque public nuisance, said it was unsuitable for a family neighborhood, and accused me of terrorizing small children. Then she passed around her photos as if she were presenting evidence in a courtroom. but the board members weren't buying it. A few of them had kids who loved Halloween. One even said that the decorations looked impressive and that, as long as I wasn't breaking any written rules, there wasn't much they could do. The look on her face was priceless, a mix of disbelief and rage. Still, she wasn't going to let it go. She demanded they revisit the guidelines and clarify standards for future seasonal displays. The board agreed to discuss it at a later date, but it was clear they weren't interested in punishing me. I left the meeting smiling. She left early, muttering under her breath. That's when I decided to make it official. If she was going to accuse me of creating a public spectacle, then I would make it a public spectacle, one that would bring the entire community together. The following week, I posted flyers around the neighborhood and on the community Facebook group. Maple Lane Halloween Night, free community event. Walk through the haunted yard, grab some candy, and enjoy spooky music. Donations welcome for the local animal shelter. The response was instant. Families started commenting that they'd come. Kids posted excited messages about how epic it sounded. Even some of the older residents said they'd stop by. Of course, Karen was livid. She commented under the post almost immediately, saying it was unauthorized, that I was holding a public event on private property, and that it was disruptive. The HOA responded publicly, saying that as long as it didn't block the street or cause safety issues, I was perfectly allowed to host it. That it was the first time I saw the tide turn completely in my favor. As Halloween night approached, I worked day and night to perfect every detail. I installed extra lights for safety, added more decorations to the path, and tested all the sound effects. I even coordinated with a few neighbors to help hand out candy and manage the crowd. It became a community effort, the kind of thing that brought people together. But for Karen, it was the ultimate nightmare. Every day leading up to Halloween, she tried something new. She called the city, claiming I was violating event permit laws. They checked. I wasn't. She tried to get the HOA to shut it down again. They refused. She even tried to warn parents that my decorations were dangerous, which only made more people curious. The night before Halloween, I caught her outside again. She was standing on her porch, glaring as I tested the fog machines. The eerie mist rolled across the street, catching the glow of orange lights. For a moment, I thought she might actually come over and start yelling, but she didn't. She just stood there, watching, defeated, but not broken. That night, I could barely sleep. Not because I was nervous, but because I was excited. Everything was ready. The speakers were synced. The lights were timed perfectly. The animatronics were armed and waiting. Tomorrow night, the entire neighborhood would see what I'd built. And Karen would finally understand that she couldn't control everything, especially not me. The clock ticked past midnight. I looked out the window one last time. My yard was silent, dark, and still. Across the street, her blinds were open just enough for me to see a flicker of movement. She was watching, as always. I smiled. She wanted a show. Tomorrow, I'd give her one. Halloween arrived crisp and cold, the kind of evening where the air carried a mix of wood smoke and anticipation. From the moment the sun began to set, the neighborhood came alive. Children darted up and down the sidewalks in costumes that glowed under the streetlights. Parents laughed and chatted at the ends of driveways. And somewhere down the block, someone had set up a speaker blasting old Halloween classics. By 6:30 p.m., people were already lining up outside my house. My yard had become the main attraction of Maple Lane. The fog machines hissed softly, filling the air with drifting mist that caught the orange and purple lights. A massive animatronic Grim Reaper loomed over the gate, its scythe glinting as it slowly turned its head toward each visitor. The path through the yard was illuminated by flickering lanterns, each one shaped like a skull. Soft, eerie music played from hidden speakers, and every few seconds, a faint whisper would float through the fog, startling anyone who wasn't expecting it. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before were smiling, laughing, taking photos. Kids squealed with delight as the motion-triggered monsters jumped to life. The donation box I'd placed at the entrance was already filling up fast. Everyone seemed to be having a great time. Everyone except Karen. She stood on her porch across the street, wrapped in a heavy shawl, glaring at the crowd as if sheer anger could disperse them. Her porch light flicked on and off several times, a clear attempt to get someone's attention. When that didn't work, she marched inside, only to reappear moments later with her phone in hand. I didn't need to guess who she was calling. Within 20 minutes, a police car slowly rolled up the street. The flashing lights reflected against the fog, adding an accidental layer of atmosphere to the scene. For a moment, everyone thought it was part of the show. The crowd even cheered. The officer got out, clearly trying not to laugh as he walked up the path toward me. He told me there had been a complaint about noise and excessive public gathering. I nodded politely, showed him the sound meter I'd been using to monitor the volume, and pointed out that everything was well below the city's legal limit. I also mentioned that the HOA had already approved the event and that the crowd was entirely on private property. He looked around, saw the families having fun, and nodded in approval. He said everything looked fine. In fact, he said it was pretty cool. Karen stormed across the street, her voice rising as she demanded that the officer do something. But the officer explained, calmly, that I wasn't breaking any laws. Then he thanked me for collecting donations for the shelter, wished me a good evening, and left. That should have been the end of it. But not for Karen. As the night went on and the crowd grew larger, she began pacing her porch, muttering and gesturing dramatically. A few neighbors tried to ignore her, but it was impossible not to notice the way she kept filming everything on her phone, as if she were gathering evidence. Then, suddenly, she disappeared inside her house again. 10 minutes later, the power went out, not just at my house, but across half the street. The lights, the sound, the fog, everything shut off at once. A collective groan went up from the crowd. For a second, I thought it was just a random outage. But then, as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw a movement near the electrical box at the side of my property. A shape. A figure. Small, quick, hunched over. Karen. She was actually trying to pull the breaker. The beam of my flashlight hit her face, and she froze, eyes wide, like a kid caught stealing candy. The crowd turned toward the commotion just as the emergency lights flicked on, illuminating the scene in an eerie red glow. A dozen phones came out instantly, recording. She tried to stammer an excuse, but it was too late. The HOA president, who had been helping me hand out candy, walked over, saw what she'd done, and immediately called the police again. Not because we needed them to arrest her, but because the HOA bylaws were clear about property tampering. Within minutes, the same officer returned, looking less amused this time. He took her statement, then mine, and confirmed what everyone already knew. She had crossed the line. He didn't arrest her, but he warned her in front of everyone that she could be charged with trespassing or vandalism if she touched my property again. The crowd applauded as he left. Karen retreated to her porch, humiliated, clutching her phone to her chest like a shield. Once the power came back on, the show resumed, and it was even better than before. The fog rolled back in, the lights flickered, and the music swelled. The tension of the moment made everything more electric. The kids cheered. Parents laughed. Even the HOA president couldn't stop smiling. What Karen didn't realize was that the entire thing, from her meltdown to the police visit, had been caught on multiple cameras. Several people had been live-streaming the event for their friends, and the footage spread quickly through local groups. By the next morning, the video had thousands of views. The title said it all. HOA Karen tries to ruin Halloween, gets booed by the whole neighborhood. The comments were brutal. People called her entitled, controlling, embarrassing. Others praised the community for standing up to her. The HOA board even issued a statement a few days later, clarifying that they supported community engagement events and reminding residents that personal grievances should never override neighborhood spirit. Karen didn't show her face for a while after that. For weeks, her blinds stayed shut, her lawn went unkempt, and her front porch was empty. Eventually, she sold the house and moved out quietly. No one knew where she went, and no one really cared. As for me, I didn't stop decorating. In fact, the next year, the neighborhood officially asked me to host the Maple Lane Halloween Festival. The HOA even covered part of the cost. We had food trucks, costume contests, music, and a donation drive that raised thousands for charity. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about community, about taking back the joy that one person had tried to steal. Sometimes, I think about that night. The fog, the flashing lights, the way the whole neighborhood came together in the end. Karen thought she could control everything with complaints and rules, but all she really did was unite everyone against her. And in a way, she gave us exactly what Halloween is supposed to be: a good scare, a good story, and a reason to laugh together afterward. In the end, she wanted to shut down my decorations. Instead, she made them legendary.